Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, isn't it, kids?
Oh, yeah.
'Tis the season.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so snowy.
I know. I'm enjoying. This is the part where I think Christmas is fun.
Yeah.
You know, where the snow.
Enjoy
seems,
it before everything goes away, and then we have desolate months of cold and
right before.
and
dry
dreariness,
air,
no
darkness,
holidays, chap,
sadness.
everything.
Right before this becomes a desolate hellscape. I'm enjoying the lights.
Like
yeah.
Hoth.
Holiday
Yes.
cheer. Yay.
Yes, I'm enjoying
don't
some
even-
holiday cheer.
We don't even have any tauntauns or anything.
We don't have tauntauns, but we do have eggnog.
Yeah.
Eggnog.
I wasn't a big fan of eggnog until I discovered Fireball whiskey, and that seems to make eggnog way better. Just the tip.
All
Out there
right.
in Radioland. Okay. Hey, Allison's joining Wendy and I today. Thanks for
Hi,
coming by, Allison.
Hey, it's great to be back, guys.
Yes, it's always good to have you. And today, since we're talking about Christmas, and it's a Christmassy feeling, we thought we would talk about, probably, I'd say, an ignored bit of Christmas folklore, and that's Santa's worker elf.
Oh, the
Elves.
unrecognized hero. He sits and makes
Well,
toys all day long.
Right. Well, the unorganized labor. Do you think Santa's a union buster?
I do.
I'm just saying.
That makes me sad.
Well, it's not like they can go elsewhere, Like, where are they going to get work? It's a pretty specialized skill.
Oh,
right. Are they going to
it's
get
like
jobs?
a Christmas sweatshop.
Are they going to get jobs in China? They're paying them less than they'd make in the North Pole.
Exactly.
So-
Oh, man.
Yeah. So I'm just saying. I feel like the elves haven't gotten their due, so we're going to make sure they get their due today.
Yay.
All right. Well, when you think about Christmas elves, Wendy, what's the first thing you
I think of the movie Elf with Will Ferrell, and I think of
Okay.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the special that we used to watch as kids. That and Frosty the Snowman. But I think Rudolph is the one that has the one little elf plays a key role in it.
Yeah, no, I totally know what you're talking about. Hey, here's something interesting I learned this week. So Gene Autry made Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer famous in like 1949. The next year, they wrote another Christmas song for him to capitalize on that, and that was Frosty the Snowman.
Really?
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, so when we complain about manufactured pop music, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman are just examples of that same.
They were churned out of the machine.
Yep, that Dr. Luke Max Martin train that now is giving us Taylor Swift and Rihanna gave us Gene Autry in the 1940s. Allison, what do you think of when you think of elves?
Well, you know what? I love the Fae, as I've made clear on many a podcast. And so, of course, I always think of the real stories of elves. And I think we're going to talk about some of those today. And,
Yeah.
how they're can be whimsical, but also fearsome creatures. You don't want to make them mad.
Yeah, that's
true.
true. And I think about Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay. How does that relate to Dungeons and Dragons? Please share.
Well, because elf is one of the races you can pick in Dungeons and Dragons. So you can pick several races. You can be a human, you can be a halfling, you can be an elf, in the basic game of D&D. And so that's kind of when I first. Besides the Lord of the Rings, that's kind of when I first
of course.
thought
But I
about
thought
elves.
I was going with the Christmas thing. Because,
Yes.
in the Rudolph movie, it's Hermie.
continue.
Hermie is the elf that he wants to be a dentist, but no, Santa has him tightly in his grips as a slave, basically, making toys, and he's trying to escape, thereby going.
Thereby continuing the discussion
Yeah, like it's totally in line with our fact that Santa is a union buster. No, but he's
right. Well, Santa's capital of the elves are labor, and Karl Marx tells us what happens when they come into conflict.
But you're right. There's more to elves than just Christmas, and between the Fae and all of the science fiction, with the Dungeons and Dragons and with, of course, Tolkien and his many elves. We've got a lot of ground to cover here.
Yes, we do. Well, we all grew up in the same area, in the Milwaukee area of Wisconsin. And so, did your parents ever make you listen to Billy the Brownie, Wendy?
No. What are you talking about?
Our mom's still making us listen.
Our mom still makes us
Billy the
listen to
Brownie.
Billy the Brownie.
Sounds yummy.
Billy
he a chocolate chip
a brownie is a brownie is a type of Scottish fairy.
Oh.
So it fits into the whole, except they don't say it like brownie, like like a chocolate brownie. They say like brownie, and so that obviously sounds more
Like a brony.
Oh.
like a brownie, like like a My Little Pony aficionado. So Billy the Brownie, but they had this little show on WTMJ on the radio in the 1950s and late 40s. And people would write letters to Billy the Brownie, and Billy the Brownie would give them updates from the North Pole on WTMJ. And Mom listened to it as a little girl.
Was it exciting for you to listen to as a child?
Well,
No.
she made me listen. No, I thought it was stupid. I mean, because it's like watching
How old were you?
like 8 or 9. It was like watching Howdy Doody.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah, it's
obviously.
very howdy doody-esque.
Yeah, but the thing is, so Billy the Brownie is this, and that always. So Billy the Brownie is another thing I think when I think of Christmas elves, and I think even a couple of years ago at Christmas, like Mom brought an old recording out, and she's like, "Let's just all listen to Billy, indulge me, and let's listen to this."
Aw,
and it was like
that's sweet.
22 minutes long, and I almost tried to jump out of the hotel room, Allison. But it was a fun thing, and you do it for Mom because she wanted to enjoy something that she loved as a kid.
Yeah, a little nostalgia in the holidays. That's nice.
Yeah. So, Christmas Elves with Santa Claus came out after the visit from St. Nicholas, because in St. Nicholas, they call him a jolly old elf. So
That's right.
Clement Clark Moore calls him a jolly old elf inside that poem. And so Louisa May Alcott in 1850, she writes a book, never gets published. She writes a book called The Christmas Elves. So the woman that brought us Little Women was ahead of her time with her book, The Christmas Elves. And then in 1873, the most popular magazine, like in the United States or whatever, is called Godey's, or Godey, Godey's Ladies Book. And they had the front illustration or whatever is Santa surrounded by a workshop full of elves. So they created that modern illustration of what we think of is Santa, overlording over the elves and making them work. So
Interesting.
yeah. So
Where did people think the gifts came from before the whole elf factory of toy making existed?
I don't know. Like if Santa had
I guess he's magic.
credit card. Yeah. Like
Was
he just
it the stork?
the stork brought the food and the babies, and Santa delivered them. So this Godey's Ladies Book or whatever kind of invented our modern idea about Santa Claus and elves. And of course, elves have been in every Santa movie, like you were talking about, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Wendy. And I think of Santa Claus the movie, where Dudley Moore plays like Santa's lead elf. And then of course the Will Ferrell movie where
that's the best.
where Bob Newhart is the head elf. And that is a pretty. I hadn't seen it since it came out or whatever, and so I watched it again last year, and it's a really good movie.
It's
I'm like, well,
cute.
I really like this movie, and I don't like Will Ferrell as a leading man. I'll say. Right
we've
there.
been
I
through
don't think
this.
Will Ferrell,
Yeah,
he cannot pull off a film on his own. Sorry, but he really nailed it in Elf. That's all I'm saying. So Christmas Elves. That's where we start. We need to start at a place because it's the Christmas
the
season.
season.
Then you guys can all be like, yeah, I know what a Christmas elf is. Of course, I know about Hermie, the poor oppressed.
Wants to be a dentist.
Wanna be dentist.
That's
All I wanted to do was be a dentist, and Santa crushes my dreams 18 hours
and
a
he has to
day.
escape from Santa to be able to fulfill his dream.
Right. This is a kid's thing. Well, I mean, obviously the writers were just talking about the soul-crushing 9-to-5s that we all had to eventually get into. But okay. So I think about Dungeons and Dragons. That Dungeons and Dragons stuff is really inspired by Tolkien.
Yep. I was gonna say, you said Dungeons and Dragons, but I mean, you're a ringer, so I was kind of surprised by that.
Oh, well, that's the first thing I think of is Dungeons and Dragons, but I know that everything comes from Tolkien. Like the characters you can play in the Dungeons and Dragons game are all just ripped straight out of, The Hobbit and
Middle Earth.
because you could be a dwarf and Middle Earth. You can be a dwarf, an elf, a halfling equals hobbit, or a human, or you can play Tom Bombadil and waste everybody's time. You can show up every 15 minutes and sing a song.
Dude just wants to have fun.
He does just want to have fun, but the Middle Earth needs saving here. We need to get to Mordor, and here, it's like, oh god, it's like the show you have to watch before your favorite show comes on. I guess we don't have to do that anymore because everything's streaming. But all right, so where do these elves come from? Where did we get the idea of this? So elf is a word, like old Germanic word.
Yeah.
So we think of Germanic languages. That's English is a Germanic, even though German is obviously a Germanic language. The Scandinavian languages. So when you think of a family of languages, they all come from this region they call the Germanic languages in Europe, right? So elf is one of those words. And it's basically used to describe, well, the main meaning was white person.
All right.
Oh. And it's not white person like in a 21st century idea of white person. Because when you're talking about, the negative first century or whatever in Scandinavia, most people are white people. So why would they call elf a white person? It's because to them, white had a connotation of beautiful, like the word white, the color white had a connotation of beautiful. So the elves weren't just like little munchkin, like dwarf gnomes kind of things. They were beautiful, stately, kind of like Tolkien's.
Right.
Elves. And it's funny because now, Allison, I know you don't watch Game of Thrones, but when do you do? And this isn't a spoiler. And this isn't a spoiler for anybody out there because it's the first, it's the first scene of the first episode of Game of Thrones. But they show a White Walker, otherwise known as, in the book, they're known as the Others. But they decided not to.
Beautiful.
well, that's the thing. So in the book, the way that George R. R. Martin envisioned the White Walkers, the Others, was not as like zombie lich kings like they are in the TV show. He envisioned them as perfect looking white frosty creatures like elves. So elves are not only the basis for like Tolkien's inspiration, it's also the inspiration for the White Walkers in the Game of Thrones.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, that's a connection I just made today from that white people, beautiful person elf to reading about how George Martin was. He's like, well, actually, I envisioned the Others, and then he's like, I'll never finish your last book.
Just like that.
Yes, it's kind of how it went. And also what's funny is that how elf is really popular in the English language in like Old English. They use that to describe, all these creatures. And then eventually, as we get to the Middle Ages, it kind of falls out of favor. So people start using words that are more close to their culture. So in Germany, they start using the word Zwerg or Zwerg. They use the word Zwerg. And that means like a dwarf in German. And Huldra, hidden person. They start using that in Scandinavia. And then in English, we start using the word fairy. So fairies becomes an interchangeable word with elf, and fairy comes from the French.
Fairy.
Right.
So, fairy. Oh.
Le fairy.
But what I think it's interesting is because they talk about elves like Chaucer, in the Canterbury Tales talks about elves, and he relates them to incubi and succubi.
Yeah. So it's interesting that there was something that was trending this week about a woman who I think she was a Brit, reportedly said that she gave up relations with men because she had more fun with ghosts. And I found an article from, a few years ago, which had a woman who had the same experience with elves in Iceland. And also
doing the
had
hippity dippity.
Yeah, had also decided she would swear off men in favor of elves. And I just was startled by how similar the stories were.
That's interesting, Allison. You talk about that because, like, we're sitting there going, like, all right, who's going to boink an elf or whatever? But it's a whole thing. As part of the original stories about elves, they're very sensual creatures.
That's right. And they, they're very beautiful creatures. And there's lots of stories about people wanting to wed elves and different sagas having to do with that. Like a woman falling in love with an elfin knight. And yeah. And he was playing he was playing his horn, and
as you do.
Yeah, and this attracted her, and but he had elaborate tasks that he gave her. If she wanted his hand in marriage, that she had to complete like this list of impossible tasks.
I did that for my wife too.
she came back at him with her own list of impossible tasks, and somehow this pleased him, and he agreed to the marriage.
Well, and that's funny. We talk about you don't think of these. You think of Santa's elves. You don't think of Santa's elves like, hey baby, what are you doing tonight? But but the story, right?
No,
like little
Mrs.
Hermie.
Claus. Yeah, little Hermie sneaks off with Mrs. Claus. Who's like,
Oh, come on now.
into the workshop.
well, for starters, they don't have any time to go out and party.
That's true.
Yeah.
because they're always working.
'Cause of that
It's like
slave
20 hours
driver.
a day. Yeah,
That's true. I guess they don't have time for a lot of love.
no social life for those guys.
unlike-
They are just building toys constantly.
Unlike these elves that we hear about. Well, it's funny that most of the elvish stories that we hear are actually Christian writers who are writing about them, and they're trying to
Really?
they're trying to take the pagan beliefs and put them into Christian theology. So they're trying to integrate elves into Christianity, and they do that by just calling them demons. Basically, when they talk about elves in medieval texts and they're discussing the beliefs, the pre-Christian beliefs in Scandinavia, they're just like,
Yeah.
yep, Satan.
Could it be?
Well, I think there was definitely that idea that elves were another race and maybe not created by God, or an idea about the hidden people as to why they became hidden is that these were Eve's other children, and she tried to hide them from God. And then God said, well, what you have hidden from God, I will now hide from man. And he made them invisible. So that's one of the folkloric ideas as to, where the hidden people in Icelandic culture may have come from.
Well, and I think it's interesting too that they think of elves and these hidden people, the people that we can't see who live alongside us, as wanting to make us sick. That elves had little weapons. They had invisible arrows they would hit us with.
Oh, man.
And they would say, you getting full of elf shot. That was an illness. Like you would be, that means you'd be sick, and that you were shot by an elf.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Next time I'm feeling under the weather, though, I'm going to be.
Right. I mean,
You're going to call in elf shot. Well,
Is it-
sorry.
yeah.
I'm sorry I can't come in today.
is
Those elves are at it again.
is that any less believable than viruses?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
hey,
a
that's
lot,
the
a
thing.
lot less
Have
believable.
you ever seen a virus? I'm just saying. I've never seen a virus. And
Yeah.
so, but the thing is, everybody's trying to explain something that they can't explain. So they, like, well, it must be the elves striking you with invisible arrows.
Right. And their venom.
All right, then, Chief, thanks. Even we get into the 17th century in Scotland, and elves are a huge part of their witch hunts, their witch trials.
Really?
So, yeah, in the trial of Isabel Godey, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. Let me say it with a Scottish accent because that's always the most appropriate. Isabel Godey. She's a witch. That's right. So Isabel Godey, what happens with her is she has 4 different confessions. And in her different confessions, she said that she can turn herself into a hare. And so to turn herself into a hare or rabbit, she would chant, I shall go into a hare with sorrow and sick and Michael care, and I shall go in the devil's name, while I come home again. And she even made up little rhymes that she would say when she was turning herself into things. And she said that the devil made elf arrows, and that there were little elf boys who would hang out with them when she'd get together with her coven, and she'd get together with her coven, and then they would, worship the devil and have relations with the devil and the whole thing.
Like
As you do.
Like you do when you're a witch who hangs out with elf boys.
A witch.
And so they're talking about elves, and it's a big part of these Scottish witch trials that happen. I think the King, James VI, had serious conversations with his cabinet about this problem that they had with these elves and these witches, that they were seducing women for the devil. So Santa's...
Oh, I see. Like the elf was like a gateway drug.
Yeah, like the elves, they're hanging out, and this the elf kind of shows up and like, hey, how you doing? I'm pretty and everything like that, and let's just, and then all of a sudden Satan shows up and is like, hey, let's have some fun. I can help you turn into a rabbit. So
Who doesn't want that?
So this idea,
Hey, ladies, over here, check this out.
when we think about elves today, we either think of them in the Tolkien way, or we think of them in the Christmas way. We think of them as some kind of woodland forest spirit, kind of deal. But people thought of them as evil just a few centuries ago. And we'll have to get into the modern beliefs in this in a second, because where elves are really hot is Iceland.
where it's really cold. And you've
right.
been there, Mike. Tell us a little bit about your experiences in Iceland.
Well, I didn't.
Did you see any elves?
I looked around for elves, actually. We talked about them on the tour. We took a few bus tours to. You see this waterfall that's gigantic, and then you go to the hot spring.
Awesome.
You go to where the geyser, where actually the word geyser was invented, because geyser is an Icelandic word.
Nice.
And you go to the continental divide. No, I'm sorry. You go to the hemispheric divide. So you go to the place that separates the eastern and western hemisphere. Like you're like, hey, I'm in the eastern hemisphere. Hey, I'm in the western hemisphere. You're in the eastern hemisphere. No, you're in the eastern hemisphere. So you do that kind of stuff, and you take these bus tours around the island. And I mean, it's a pretty scenic place. There's not a lot of trees because it's mostly lava rock there. So there really are very few, trees in Iceland. It kind of looks like a moonscape. Part of it.
I heard it's pretty dramatic, in its transition. So it's like really flat, and then here's a mountain.
Yeah, and beautiful. And stayed in Reykjavik for a few days, and went to the hot springs, like the Blue Lagoon, which is like a gigantic hot tub. And it's supposed to be good for your skin and everything. And I don't know if it was good for my skin, but it's like this gigantic hot tub. You stay in there all day, and there's like 1,000 people in this gigantic hot tub. Just gigantic natural hot tub.
Oh, man.
But
that sounds awesome.
Also, the thing about it too are these pools. Like you're walking around, there's just pools, and the pools have like water that if you put it would like disintegrate your hand. It's like so scalding hot.
Oh.
So be careful. Don't just fall in the water because you might be dead.
Yeah.
So, but on the bus tour, you'd go by this area, and you could see some rocks piled up and boulders. And the tour guide was funny because you know how we say or we kind of hold on to words like there's those little transitional words while we're thinking of what to say.
Right.
The vocalized pauses.
Yeah, the tour guide in Iceland, his vocalized pause was orga.
Whoa.
And so
Cool.
he'd be speaking in English, he'd be like, talking about like, and this is where we think the elves is orga. And then what? And it got to be that I wasn't even listening to the tour. I was just,
That's the only word you hear.
all I heard was, and so this is where the first geyser was orga. And you're like, what is going on? And so, but I can see that because there's so many parts of the island that are desolate. And the thing is, even Reykjavik, or the entire island of Iceland is probably like it's like the size of Madison with the students, when the students are here.
Wow.
It's like 300,000, between 300,000 and 400,000 people. So it's not this, big, it's like the size of Racine, Alice, in Racine, Wisconsin, which is between
Yeah.
Milwaukee and Chicago. And so it's just not a huge place. And can you imagine them being very isolated in the 11th century? You know, when they first got
Yeah.
there, you know, when the Vikings got there and they're thinking that it take the place over, and there's nobody to take over the place from besides the elves. Well, and that's the thing. People say, you know, I think even the Icelandic prime minister said at one point, he said, well, when we got here, there wasn't that many people. So we doubled the population of our island with stories.
Oh, well,
There you go. That works.
well, you know, that's really charming and everything. But hey, Icelanders really do believe in elves. And there's been numerous polls that show that, well, there's a figure that cited, you know, 54% believe in elves, but that's not exactly accurate because it was like 54% won't deny their existence.
Fair enough.
And like 8% definitely believe. And then there's other polls, like there's one from 98 that said around 50% of men and 60% of women believe. There's no question that there is a strong belief there, you know, no matter what kind of percentage you put on it. And I think there's pressure from the outside world not to believe, but there's also this strong pull towards something else, you know, that people are like, well, just in case, I'm not going to deny their existence because I don't want to make them mad.
Well, you know, and I love the fact that Iceland, they have this, I can't even pronounce the classic Icelandic saga about the light elves and the dark elves, the Ijosalfar and the Dokkalfar. And so there's the elves who live above ground and the elves who live underground. And the elves who live above ground are the pretty white elves. They're the good-looking ones. And the ones who live below ground are the evil-looking ones. And Dungeons & Dragons has that too. They have the dark elves, the drow, who live below ground. And then also Thor 2, The Dark World, Christopher Eccleston, the Ninth Doctor, played the head of the Dark Elves fighting Thor. And that anyway, don't bother with Thor 2. It's not even that good. It's forgettable.
Spoiler
and
alert.
it's a waste of Christopher Eccleston, who I think who's obviously awesome. But the thing is, the Icelanders, I mean, they still do believe, and they even have an elf school
Yeah.
there.
You know, did you go to the elf school, Mike, when you were
No,
there?
I did not even hear
Oh,
about the elf
man.
school. And to think,
That'd be so fun. Field
I
trip.
totally would have paid to go to the elf school. I do not think I could have convinced Chris to go to the elf school. She'd be like, "We're gonna maybe she'd be like, all right, if they have elf beer, we can go to the elf school."
They have pancakes.
Elf cakes.
I'm sure they do.
They give you all kinds of little treats. I'm not sure about beer, but they have pancakes. That sounds good.
Well, maybe they'll give you. One thing they do is they like freeze sharks. And
No,
they
not
dip
that.
They dip the shark meat into vodka, and then
I thought it was just fat.
it's just shark fat.
There's some, and it's like partially rotten or something. Like it's some.
Yeah,
Okay,
That
we should look
sounds
this up.
great.
Yes. That's what they give you at the elf school.
Yeah,
You
that's snack time.
you want to be a Viking or
forget the carton of chocolate milk and graham crackers.
right?
You're getting some shark fat.
We make you
Yeah,
hard.
putrid shark fat.
Rotten shark.
But they have the elf school. Anthropologist Magnus Skarbedensson. He's the guy that's collected all the accounts. We emailed him to be on this show. He didn't get back to me but I think he's the most popular Icelander in the world this week because everybody wants to know about the elf school. And he's like,
I do.
there's no doubt that they exist. And he just talks about the witnesses that he has met and accounts that he has collected of people that see elves. One, there's a story of a woman who knew a fisherman who was able to see elves who would also go out to sea to fish. And this is from the South China Morning Post. That's where I get all my news. and they had an interview with Magnus a couple years back. One morning, February 1921, the fisherman noticed that they weren't heading out to sea, and he tried to convince the other fishermen not to go out either, but the boss would not let them stay on shore. There was a violent storm, but the fisherman who heeded his warning and stayed close to shore returned home safe and sound. And so what happens is that the guy does not see the elves go out to sea for their day of fishing, and he's like, I think there's something up. And then what happens is that day is when it's the violent storm and people almost die. So it was like,
wow.
But it goes back to the idea that they treat elves as invisible people who live right beside us.
Right. And
so,
you have to have a relationship with them. And if you do, good things can come out of it. Or if you do something to offend them, really bad things.
Right.
Okay, so Wendy did find the world's most disgusting food.
Because we have a friend who's tried it before, and he told me about it.
Yeah.
The shark fat that's like buried. They bury it or something.
Yeah, Hakarl shark. So you probably hear that the traditional way of fermenting the shark is to bury it in the ground and then urinate on it before letting it rot for some months.
They didn't say urinate on it, did they?
Yeah, it does.
This is not true.
It actually says that.
Oh, well, the urinating bit is true, but the shark doesn't rot; it ferments, and urine is no longer used in this process because we have
Thank goodness.
we have other things to help things ferment besides our urine.
Oh.
But the shark does smell ammonia, and that's where the myth comes from. Because of the curing process, which goes for, they bury the shark underground, then they hang it to dry for 4 to 5 months. Yeah. And so
that sounds not so delicious.
Fermented shark.
Would you try it if you were there and somebody?
I'm not sure. I was comfortable with eating scorpions because there's plenty of bugs in the world.
You ate a scorpion, Mike?
Yeah.
When was this?
That's nasty.
Somebody had this thing called the scorpion shot, and it was something you add to a shot, and it was just a scorpion, a dead scorpion, and you eat the scorpion and take the shot.
So gross.
Oh, was it salty?
Kind of like tequila, when there's the worm in the tequila. It's kind of a similar concept.
Yeah, the scorpion. It was just crunchy. It was just like having. It was like having a pretzel in your shot. Except that pretzel was a scorpion.
It was just crunchy. Okay. Yeah. But not salty.
Nah, not really. I mean, it depends on what you drink it with, probably. It was kind of in like a sweet solution, too. So, like, whatever you put it in kind of had a sweet flavor. You could have different
right.
It's kind of like scorpion brittle.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, but it was liquid, though. It wasn't
Scorpion.
like a crunchy. Like, it wasn't like brittle like you crunch into it like a peanut brittle. It was a shot. So it was like alcohol, basically.
Scorpion brittle.
Anyway, the shark.
Somebody should make that.
Wendy would
probably try it.
Yeah.
I would try it if I was over there and it was like a once in a lifetime,
Just to say you did it.
Yeah. And to not be rude if it's like a cultural thing and they're like, oh, is this, something important?
Right. Like if you don't do this, we're all going to be very Icelandically offended and we're going to feed you to the elves.
We're going to be right. And we're going to like hold it against all of America that you close-minded Americans.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, Magnus runs this school and I read the whole article about like what happens in elf school and they basically just talk about legends. And
I would totally love that.
Well, do they get to what, Wendy?
Like, do you get to wear pointy shoes and
I don't know if
everything when you go to elf school?
No pointy shoes.
Come on.
But you do I think they try to teach you a little bit of, because the thing is most of the people that say they can see elves are like people that say they're psychics.
That's true. Yeah.
So the people that say they can see it are people that have like a special affinity.
So they're not teaching you to be an elf. They're teaching you to
see elves.
Like communicate with elves.
Yeah, well they have this thing called the Elf Whisperer.
Ooh.
And I just watched an interview with her and it was pretty interesting. So Raga Jonsdottir, she says she can speak with elves, and she goes to this place that she's like the elf park. And she goes to the elf park, and she's like, "Oh, that's where they live," and "Oh, that's her house," and her house is bigger on the inside than the outside, so it's like a TARDIS.
TARDIS.
But she says like, okay, that the hidden folk and the elves are different people, because Iceland also have these huldufolk, these hidden folk. That's a completely different legend for a different time. But that's the thing. And so she says that she talks to elves and she takes people on little tours, and she'll make herbal tea that she says the elves help make the leaves, or they help grow the leaves for the tea. And
that sounds yummy.
So you can spend the day, and she says she talks to elves through telepathy and meditation.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it does.
One thing that Magnus has said is that in other countries, this is a quote from him, with Western scientific arrogance and the denial of everything, right, that they have not discovered themselves. They say that witnesses are subject to hallucinations. So, and I think it would be easy to just scoff at this psychic, for example, but I think you gotta really appreciate that there's other ways to experience the world than, through science. I mean, science is awesome, but it's not the only view. Like the westernized view is not the only view of the world. And, there are other views of the world too. They all have their pros and cons.
I agree. I mean, I just said I would eat fermented shark, right?
Yeah, you did.
No, but you're right though. That's part of, traveling. Part of the appeal of it is being able to experience different cultures and different viewpoints and different things outside of our standard beliefs that we've been raised with.
Yeah.
It's exciting to find things like that are so far off from what we've been traditionally told.
Well, you got to take. I think you got to take the parts that are most, I'd say, beneficial out of each. So, like, believing in elves is neat and it can be fun, and thinking that there's elves in the elf park is great, but at the same time, thinking that elf shot causes people to be sick instead of viruses can be very harmful to people. So you have to take you got to take a little bit of each and say like, okay, it's interesting that in 1996, and I take this from Mysterious Universe article where they're talking about mysterious encounters with fairy tale creatures. So 1996, bulldozers are attempting to level a hill in Kurpaverger. That's my Icelandic. And I apologize to any Icelanders out there. You have a beautiful country, but I'm butchering your language. Reykjavik. In order to make way for the construction of a graveyard, strange things began to occur. According to a bulldozer operator, Hjortur Hjartarson, during the operation, 2 bulldozers continually malfunctioned, even though there was no discernible reason, and inspections turned up no problems with the machines. In addition to these equipment breakdowns, news crews who arrived at the scene claimed that their cameras would mysteriously cease functioning when trained on the hill, even though they worked as expected anywhere else. The stubborn problems dogged the construction team so relentlessly that specialists were brought in to try and communicate with the elves, after which the machinery started working normally again, and the bulldozers would allegedly have no further mishaps. Similarly, in 2013, various equipment failures created hurdles for the building of a road from the Alftanes Peninsula to Garderbyr, a suburb of Iceland's capital, Reykjavik. There are also a mining operation in 2011.
Are you saying Reykjavik on purpose, Mike?
Yes, Reykjavik. I know. I mean,
you just want to make things difficult.
Yeah, I thought it was a joke the first time, and then I'm like, he knows it, right?
No, I know. I'm sorry. There was also a mining operation in 2011 that was scrapped to a never-ending series of strange malfunctions and mishaps. Now, I've read about that 1996 Icelandic thing because that one is really well documented. There's a whole bunch of different places where you can see interviews with the people and stuff. They talk about, they're like nothing was working, and then the seers came in who said they could talk to elves, and then things started working.
Yeah, and this actually goes back further than that to like the 30s and 40s. There were similar problems with road construction projects, and man, they just had so many problems with equipment, like drills breaking down, just everything you can possibly think of, just things constantly breaking. Now, I know that kind of stuff is just easy to blow off, but Mike and I have both had our own experiences now with equipment malfunctioning in mysterious circumstances where you're like
eyewitness reports.
Yeah, where you're like, come on now. this can't be real. What people tell me, I mean, it's just they don't know their technology, right? And then it happens to you, and you're like, it's another thing that I thought I knew. I'm scoffing about it, and then it happens to you, and then you take the equipment into another environment. It works perfectly fine. I think we've both had that experience, and hey, the thing is, things like this do happen. And it's easy for you when you're not there to say, oh, it must have been this or that. When you're on the scene and stuff keeps breaking down, hey, I think it's unscientific at some point to be like, oh, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for this. Well, really?
Well, at the same, I mean, there are things that could cause it. It doesn't necessarily have to be. If it was my brain that's causing it, though, that too. Like that's the thing. Like if your brain is able to make a battery drain, then that's supernatural in itself. Not necessarily supernatural, but that's paranormal.
That's beyond our understanding.
Well, okay. So 2 weeks ago we talked about how Santa Claus is real. Because there's actually been Santa Claus sightings, and we talked about how Santa Claus might be a tulpa.
Yeah,
and I saw the Tooth Fairy.
And Wendy for real saw the Tooth Fairy.
What?
Yeah,
I missed that one.
We'll go back and listen to the episode Santa is real, and you'll see how Wendy proved
episode 173.
Wendy proved that the Tooth Fairy is real. Everybody, so don't bother putting the money into your kids' pillows tonight because Wendy's taking care of it.
No, I'm just, yeah.
But okay, so
definitely.
We were talking about the About.com paranormal phenomena expert Stephen Wagner, and he was the guy that was collecting the real stories of Santa Claus. All right, so also on his page, he talked about a woman named KT. That was she just gave her initials, so that's always suspect when somebody's like, well, here's my initials are, AH or whatever. She was living in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. She said she'd been walking through the woods when she came upon an area that looked just a little different than she was used to. Something ethereal, shimmery, she said. So maybe she saw like a vampire from Twilight out there or something like that. Like Team Edward was out there. Continuing on, she then found herself, quote, face to face with a tiny, quote, elf-looking man with pointy ears and a pointy cap. When she startled and she yelled, he vanished without a trace. So we've had elf sightings in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
Another guy talks about elves wandering his farm at night in Tennessee, and this is from like 2015. This is a Reddit user talked about, and so I talked about how I read the Reddit paranormal page all the time, and then there's usually nothing good. But this guy was talking about how he's been spending time on a farm, and he saw like little creatures running around at night. And he's like, they got to be elves, man.
Well, Mike, I don't know if you remember, but we have a musician friend who told us a story about, I don't know if you'd call it an elf, but she was traveling through Wisconsin. Out in the country.
Hold on, I don't quite know if I remember this. A lot of the stories we hear from our musician friends are when I'm musically inclined, which means I'm drinking. So what's the story, Wendy? Let's hear it.
Well, we were in Merrill, Wisconsin, which is north of Wausau.
So it's basically the North Pole.
Staying at our friend, the booking agent's house.
Yes.
And he often has other musicians crashing there as well. And this other musician told us that while she was traveling, she looked up. She was driving down one of those rural roads, very out in the country. And she saw what appeared to be a man, but was like a quarter scale version of a man.
Wow.
Off on the side of the road. And she said, I swear it was a person, but it was just like a shrunken down person, like a tiny little man.
Now I remember that.
Do you remember that story? Okay, all right.
Okay.
Because I was blown away by it because, it was very earnest when she told us, and she was, not intoxicated or altered state of mind at the time when it happened. She was driving and she was sober, and this is what she saw and that she told us about. So
yeah,
perhaps there's elves in Wisconsin lurking around.
I sure hope so.
In the countryside.
I think there are because, as we were talking about, these elfin legends of, the Anglo-Saxon, the Germanic peoples, the Icelandic and Scandinavian peoples. That's not the only place that has beliefs in elves. in the little people. So that's the thing. That's the thing that gets me, is when there are these strong cross-cultural connections, and we have those in the United States among the Native people. So many different tribes all over the United States and also in Wisconsin have belief in the little people. And when you hear them describe, what these little people are like, oh man, it is so close to, what you would hear, in Ireland, or what you would hear in Iceland. So this idea that there are these little people that live among us, and many of the native tribes, not all, but because you can't make that sweeping generalization, but many do have a protective relationship going with the little people, instead of thinking that they're very frightening, thinking that they are your protectors. So there are stories in many cultures of these little people being protective, but you do need to remember to lay out offerings and thank them for what they do. Otherwise, in the stories we've been talking about of European derivation, you get into significant trouble if you don't thank them properly. And I don't know exactly what happens in native cultures, but I would think it would be similar. But yeah, there's this definite belief that you will lay out corn cakes, berries, meat for the little people to thank them for what they do. And that's very, very important. Yeah.
When we talked to Lapaka from Mysteries of Hawaii, he talks about stories of the Menehune.
That's right. And the other thing too is, not only have these little people held up construction in Iceland, but they've held up construction in Ireland as well on certain roads. And also in Hawaii, when road construction projects were being contested, many of them were contested because of the Menehune being active in that area. And then also in our country, there have been native tribes who have sounded opposition against different projects, again, building projects that would interfere with the little people. So the cross-cultural connections are so strong, and there's so much similarity among cultures that, probably didn't have any contact.
Well, it's interesting, and of course, is the fact that so many different cultures over time, and who had no contact with each other, have stories of little people. It's the same thing. So some people are protective, like the Cherokee, the Yunwi Tsunsi. I'm obviously butchering that, but the Cherokee tradition of little people, they're protective, like you were talking about. They can be very mercurial, like the Menehune, so they can help you when you're sweet to them, and they can cause problems when you try to put an overpass or whatever over their place. And there's the Shoshone Namaragar, who are aggressive. The name means people eaters in the language. And so, there's difference. So the little people, they sound more like the Haunchies, in that they're kind of evil. The Shoshone legends, maybe not evil, but they're very aggressive. In that once a Namaragar was no longer contribute to his tribe, well, they killed him with a single blow to the head. And so that was it. Well, you can't help. You're done. Boom. And things like that. So they sound like the Klingons of the Shoshone, like little Klingons is how I think about them. Is that, you're no good, so we kill you. And when you talk about the Irish elves and the Irish kind of fairies there that have interfered with the construction of the roads and stuff, what was that movie that came out a couple years ago? Was it
Are you talking about the Hollow?
Yeah, The Hollow is a perfect example of how you can see. It really gets to fairies are cute and it's Tinkerbell and stuff, and to well, what do you think about this? It's more about
Right.
it's more about fairies, and how they would steal children and change them out. And we'll have to do a whole episode on changelings sometime, because that's more of the sicko aspect of the fae.
Right.
And like I said before we talked to Jeffrey Holder about poltergeists, I really thought about fairies as that's Arthur Conan Doyle he'd believe anything,
Right. The Cottingley fairies.
Right, he'd just be like, "Look at those fairies. These are completely real. I am a great believing walrus." And so that's just what he did all the time. He just believed whatever people would say. He just wanted to believe so badly that he would do that. But then you think, well, there's a reason that people thought that fairies existed, and maybe it's because these weird poltergeist-like phenomena were happening, and that fairies don't care about your morale. They're like an H.P. Lovecraft character, not a character, but H.P. Lovecraft, the antagonists, the elder gods and everything. It's not that they're amoral or they're evil. They just don't. They have no sense of human morality whatsoever. They're completely alien, and that's how I think about these elves and fairies. I think about them like that. The Hollow is an excellent example of that.
Right.
So
yeah, that they're running completely different algorithm than we are. They're just going about things in a way that we can't understand. But then you look at tribal relationships with the Fae, and you see, well, they're getting along. So why is it that Westerners have such trouble with it? Europeans have so much trouble with it when native people seem to be able to figure it out. But I know there's been an embattled project in Connecticut on Mohegan. It's not Mohican. There's two different tribes. There's the Mohegan tribe and the Mohican tribe, not to be confused with each other. So in Connecticut, they have the Mohegan tribe, and there are some sacred stone piles on Mohegan Hill that have been hotly contested over certain development projects in the past, and the Mohicans strongly believe that their little people friends live in those stone piles, and that these friends have protected them throughout the centuries, and they need to be preserved, and that in some way if they're disrupted, they'll leave or what have you. But so there's really that belief still exists here among some tribes in the United States, and it is a stated reason why certain development projects are hotly contested.
Well, I think it's interesting. You talk about the difference between some Native American cultures, maybe not the Shoshone, but the other ones you're talking about, who have these positive relationships with the little people, and versus the Europeans. And I think one of the big things there is that when you talk about the cosmology, the myths in the religions of Europeans versus the myths in the cosmology of the Indians, of the American Indians, is that in the European, it's a dichotomy. There's God, and there's Satan. And God is good and all loving, and Satan's bad and wants to hurt you. And so anything that comes from God has to be good. Anything that comes from Satan has to be bad. And in the Indian cosmology, it often seems that they're much more of some things are good, some things are bad. Sometimes, people can be, or gods and characters can be both good and bad. They're neither completely wonderful to us or completely horrible. They can be sometimes awesome and sometimes terrifying, and
kind of like humans.
Yeah, and that's even more like an Old Testament God. The Old Testament God. We talk about the pre-European. So when the Old Testament, when Judaism and in the Middle East and stuff, the Old Testament God is a vengeful and angry God where he's doing good stuff for the Israelites. He loves the Israelites. He's like, you know what? I'm going to let you guys right on through that Red Sea. Come on, you're coming on through the Red Sea. And then when the Egyptians come through, he's like, I'm going to kill you. And then, and then he's like, hey, I'm going to turn your wife into a pillar of salt. Yeah. You like that now? You like that? You shouldn't have turned around, should you? Yeah, I turned you into a pillar of salt. So the Old Testament God is much more like this. He can be wonderful. He, she, whoever. I'm betting on God's a she because she's cruel. But gods can be that the gods are mercurial, like we're talking about fairies. So I think that the biggest problem in dealing with that from a European perspective is often going to be the fact that it's either good or evil, and not really in between kind of characters. And I wanted to get a real quick before we get to the last couple of points, which we're going to be about some basis for why we might have elf stories in all these different kind of cultures. I wanted to talk about the Alabama leprechaun. You guys remember that?
No, tell us.
No, but it sounds awesome.
Okay, so this was like in March 2006. It's in Mobile, Alabama. Crichton is the neighborhood, and somebody reports that they saw a leprechaun in a tree, and then they create this sketch. It's the sketch of the leprechaun, and it looks like the traditional leprechaun hat, but the sketch is like done by like a 4-year-old. Like it looks like here is the the sketch, and it's like a little face with like a little leprechaun hat, and they're like, well, that's what we saw up in that tree.
The hat had a buckle on it?
Yeah. The hat has a buckle. And so the TV crew comes down to investigate because it's March 14th, 2006. So it's right by St. Patrick's Day, right? And the reporter's talking about it. And he interviews one woman, and she goes, well, it might be a leprechaun, or it could have been a crackhead. And then somebody else is like, no, I saw his leprechaun flute. And the leprechaun told me it was thousands of years old. So then the guy who talked about the flute, like he becomes memed as the flute man. And so all these people start saying that they're talking about seeing a little leprechaun up there, and they'll show the viral videos. We'll post some of these videos to the show notes, othersidepodcast.com/175, because they are ridiculous and they are funny. But the Crichton leprechaun, the Alabama leprechaun, in March of 2006, a whole bunch of people in this neighborhood in Mobile, Alabama, said that they saw a little leprechaun in a tree. And the TV station came out there, and it just became a really a silly story that could run, everybody else could run with on St. Patrick's Day of that year. And then so they'll rerun the videos by St. Patrick's Day now because they're so ridiculous.
That's perfect. But it also brings up a good point that all of these different elves and folklore, they're very different from what we have in our Santa folklore.
Yeah.
The Santa elves are very human-like, and they're very like worker bee, year-round, sitting there slaving away.
Right.
Creating toys. Oh, they must be technologically advanced because they're manufacturing like Xboxes and PS3s and all the iPhones and all that stuff, right?
Think about how tiny their fingers must be in order to be able to get on those circuit boards. Those circuit boards, that's
exactly.
And microchips, that is really complex, minuscule work. That's not just putting the ship in a bottle or whatever. That is, that's really small. So when
highly technical too.
So I can imagine that Santa's elves, when they do have a chance, when they get their one day off a year, December 26th, they get Boxing Day off or whatever, that they probably have to rest their sore hands from all that kind of work. Like,
I would
and you think about their carpal tunnel, like they probably don't even they probably don't even cover that with the North Pole Health Plan anymore, because they're like, look, that's a pre-existing condition, guys. We cannot cover this. All right. So, what are some possible sources of the elf legend? Well, one is a big one that came out just a few years ago, and that's Homo floresiensis. You guys remember that?
Oh yeah, that's my favorite. Yeah, I love The Hobbit.
Right. So they found Flores Man, the island of Flores, in Indonesia, and this was somebody that'd be about 3.5 foot in height.
Yeah. That's right. And I think actually, because of the location there, which is in Indonesia, the archipelago of Indonesia, where they also believe in orang pendek, which is the Littlefoot. I think that they found archaeological evidence of one of those orang pendants. I think that's what the Homo floresiensis is. But that's my thing.
Interesting.
And so you have a tiny version of a tiny human living in Indonesia. This is we found, and so surviving up until like 50,000 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're going back and forth on there, but the idea is that it was with us long enough for us to notice and make it part of our cultural memory.
Because they live right alongside us, and they wouldn't be invisible. I mean, they would be unless you look down. Right?
You really got to look down.
You really got to be looking down all the time.
Even I would get to look down this time.
Right. Even a hobbit like you, Allison, could look down at the hobbit.
That's right.
Aww.
So
I do love elevensies.
the halflings of Indonesia, the Homo floresiensis, are interesting, and I think that might be one of the possible, that's stuck with us over time. It's it's some kind of genetic memory. Even though I know there's no evidence for genetic memory, I still think it's fun to talk about. The other thing I thought was interesting was a Time magazine story from June of this year, and it talks about Williams syndrome. And
what is that?
It's a disorder caused by a genetic deletion. It affects 1 in every 10,000 people. So what's the quick math on that? Like 0.001% or, something like that?
I don't know. It's after hours. You can do the math.
All right.
No math for me right now.
But there's really unique symptoms. They do have some intellectual challenges. So they have some challenges they have to go through. They don't develop quite normally intellectually, but they hug everybody. Number one. So that's because they kind of make up for it by being they're endearing and
sweet.
Friendly. They're highly musical. Some of them so much they can be considered savants. Witty, charming, they're predisposed. So this genetic deletion might mean that nobody's going to be a rocket scientist, but might mean that they're a lot more fun to hang around with. They hug you, they're funny, and also they have a distinctive set of facial features which can be described as elfin.
Really?
So, yeah, and you can see some of these pictures of different, kids and stuff, and it's just, you could see it. It's a certain kind of facial features. So they used to call it, in the 1960s when it first came out, it was called elfin face syndrome. And so the researchers, even in the beginning, were like, these are like elves. In fact, she's researching the book about the system. She talks about this one boy who had Williams syndrome, and his mother. The mother was so struck by her son's resemblance to Puck, who is the elf from Midsummer Night's Dream. He's always full of mischief, and Puck is not the guy from the real world for you 90s kids, but Puck is the elf from Midsummer Night's Dream. And he reminded her so much of him that she hung a picture up in their house of Puck. So that's an idea, that's another place where elves could be our idea of fairies and elves, and musical, magical, whimsical, might come from experience with people with Williams syndrome. And then also we talked about sexual relations with elves before. That's the kind of thing where it could be, well, why the kid turned out like that. Because it was the elf that got with mom. So when you think about medieval explanations for things or how things develop, and you think about the way we think elves look like, between the memory of the little people that we have and elfin face syndrome, this Williams syndrome, certainly they could put fuel to the fire of beings that live right alongside us, in addition to actually weird things happening to people that have nothing to do with Homo floresiensis or Williams syndrome. It's just there's something out there that's messing with with our stuff.
Yeah, I think yeah. I mean, when you have all these cross-cultural connections, I think something's going on, and I can't say what it is, but it's just so bizarre that stories from Hawaii and stories from the Native American cultures in the States can be so similar.
Yeah,
to,
and Thor too.
Yeah. Yeah, and Thor too can be so similar to, these European ideas and ideas from Iceland.
Right.
I don't know. I think there's something. Think there's some there, and I hope I get an elfin visit tonight.
Me too. Me too. Well, the thing is, we're gonna talk more of
Yay.
this. So just to finish up, we do know somebody who said. I mean, first of all, we have the story of somebody who told us that they saw an elf in up north, and we also have someone that said at a convention that he's got an elf living in his house.
Oh, that's right. Are you talking about John Tenney?
I am talking about that weird maven, John Tenney.
Yeah, one of my favorites.
And I don't want to tell too much about his story because I eventually want to get him on the show to talk about it himself.
And it's good.
Right.
It's really good.
And there's confirmation from our friends Greg and Dana too that said they saw it.
Yeah,
in a Skype session. So the elf is showing up in Skype. I wonder what his
I know.
I wonder what his Skype name is.
I want to Skype with an elf.
It's probably Ilfs like Ilfsjor _ Dotterson or some, it's something Scandinavian.
It does bring to light, that when you're Skyping with someone, you should pay close attention to the background of their room because there could be something there that you might catch.
Right, and I'm excited too because John Tenney, one of the secrets as to how to see an elf is to eat a vegan diet.
Oh,
which is something that he does and I do. So,
but he was talking about it like a forest elemental kind of thing, is like or an elemental of the woods, and
that's right.
That goes with the whole idea of
nature spirits.
Yeah, so some kind of nature spirit, and that's the same thing as the elves we're talking about. It's maybe not the satanic elves of poor Isabel Gowdy in Scotland. But the other elves that we're talking about, they're nature spirits, and nature spirits can be good when you're doing stuff for them, like maybe eating vegan or, I don't know, sucking on an acorn or something like that.
Or like Findhorn, right? In Scotland, they grew like gigantic organic vegetables with the help of elves. Forgot about that.
Obviously. So, right. Or I mean, my man Keebler is always giving me those delicious fudge delights. So anyway, or the Usinger elves. How do we forget about the Usinger elves?
Oh my gosh, we're from Milwaukee. Come on.
We did not bring up the other elves we should be thinking about, which are the
that make meat.
Right.
There's so much to talk about.
Those elves, stick meat in tubes.
Yep.
That's their specialty. They just punch it right in there.
They're the dark elves. They're the dark elves who live underground.
That's right.
And what I didn't think about either was the similarity about the light and the dark elves is also very much like the Eloi. And who else? Who are the bad guys in the Time Machine?
Oh yeah. I don't know. Oh, is it something with an M? Morlocks or something?
Yes, the Morlocks and the Eloi. So that is
Morlocks? Okay.
Yeah,
something.
The Morlocks and the Eloi is totally like the light and dark elves. From that ancient Icelandic saga. So that's kind of fun there too. And anyway,
getting a little literary with it.
Yeah, and that when we're getting too literary, that means it's time to go. So Allison, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Wendy, and happy holidays.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
So everybody,
you too.
Make sure to keep your eyes out for an elf on your shelf, a real elf, not just one of those commercial things, but there might actually be a real one coming to visit you this Christmas.
They're watching you be naughty.
For this week's song, we took a poem that was written anonymously in 1857 for Harper's Weekly, and we put some music to it. There just aren't enough Christmas songs that talk about Santa's elves. And since this poem was one of the first documents of St. Nick's sweatshop, we're excited to be the first ones to immortalize it in song. So here's Sunspot with The Wonders of Santa Claus.
Christmas Eve's arrive. Not doubt or overjoyed to hear the yeoman's still alive. In this house upon a hill and almost out of sight, he keeps his many elves at work, working with all their might to make a million pretty things, like sugar plums and toys, to fill the stockings hung up by the little girls and boys. to shop. But when he hears a stranger, he orders the elves to stop. And the house, the working workmen all just take a twist. Just when you think that they are there, they're off in a frosty mist. In this house upon a hill and almost out of sight, he keeps his many elves at work, working with all their might to make a million pretty things, take sugar, plums and toys, to fill the stockings hung up by the little girls and boys. The length his list extends of curious gifts the queer old man prepares for Christmas friends. You might be guessing who he is and the country whence he came, why he was born in Turkey and St. Nicholas is his name. In his house upon a hill and almost out of sight, he keeps his many elves at work, working with all their might to make a million pretty things, take sugar, plums and toys, to fill the stockings hung up by the little girls and boys.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. And an extra special thanks to our Patreon supporters. We'd love to have you join that community, and you can do so by visiting othersidepodcast.com/donate. And we can't wait to catch up with everybody on December 27th. That's a Wednesday night, and we're going to have our live Google Hangout. Don't forget to watch your favorite holiday movies. We were talking about watching Gremlins or maybe Krampus or any other of the weird themed holiday movies you can think of. Extra special giant thanks to our Patreon supporter, Ned, who is pledging at a level where he gets his own shout out every podcast episode. And we are so happy to do that because, Ned, you're awesome. Have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you next time.
I like his ears.